Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. My goal is what we've discussed today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments for this episode about what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm very delighted and honored to be joined by Sally Helgesen, which is cited in Forbes as the world's premier expert on women's leadership and is an internationally best-selling author, speaker, and leadership coach. Her most recent book, How Women Rise, examines the behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women. It became a top seller in its field within the first week of its publication, and rights have been sold in 18 languages. Thank you for joining me today, Sally, on the program.
Oh, Charles, it's wonderful to be here with you. And I will say this, we have now officially sold in 22 languages.
Wow. Congratulations. Quite the accomplishment for that book. Wonderful book that we're going to unpack a little bit today for our listeners. But first, I know that over the last 3 decades, you have been helping women around the globe grow their leadership skills and consulting with executive teams that are looking to retain talented women. What got you interested in this field?
You know, it really came very much from personal experience. Back in the 80s, I was working in corporate communications. And what I saw was that the organizations that I worked with, which were excellent organizations, had absolutely no idea of the value that women could contribute, especially at any kind of strategic level. And I felt that this was a big problem and that it needed to be addressed. So I had the idea of writing a book that would look at how really successful women leaders did things, identifying what were their strengths, what were some of their habits. And that book became The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, published in 1990. Very proud to say it is still in print after 32 years. And I think because it was the first book that focused on women's strengths rather than how they needed to change and adapt, it became very popular and companies started asking me to speak to their women or come in and talk to leadership teams. And I just realized this was a very good path for me. So I continued with it, wrote more books, articles, and of course have done workshops and keynotes around the world now for the last 33 years.
Wow, quite impressive. And I'm sure all of this has provided you with lots of insights into the many challenges that women leaders face and what gets in their way. Have you noticed one thing over your career that seems to always be an issue or a challenge to women in which they've continually faced and really hasn't lessened over time?
I think everything's gotten better over time. I mean, this was a tough environment back in 1990. But I do think the one thing that has stayed relatively consistent is women's discomfort often with talking about their achievements or their contributions. They've seen it done badly. They've seen it done boastfully. They don't feel comfortable with that. They feel that it would be inauthentic. They can't find a way to do it that they are comfortable with. So I think that's the one thing that's remained pretty consistent, and I'm doing my best to make it better.
Thank you for providing that. And I love the focus of your book. And you make it very clear that you're not seeking to blame women and you're not looking at external barriers, which I think people can get lost in, but you're focusing on what they can change and can control in your book and helping women recognize those behaviors that really get in their way of them becoming successful. How did you identify that shift and why did you choose to focus on that?
Well, it is interesting because I had spent so many decades focusing on women's strengths and identifying more strengths. But what I saw was that certain habits, such as the one we just discussed about this reluctance to claim achievements, continued to hold women back. And they were pretty widespread across culture. I was also influenced by Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is about habits and behaviors that can serve us well early in our careers, but get in the way as we try to move to leadership positions. So I decided the time was right to begin to look at those, as you say, internal barriers, not the cultural and structural barriers, which, yes, still exist in different degrees in different cultures and organizations.
I think that's why it has so much more impact, the book, because you are focusing on what they can control. And we're going to get into that a little more deeper, what that behavior change elements are. But I love for you to kind of unpack a little bit of why you think organizations find it so difficult to retain high performing women senior leaders. What are some of those barriers or maybe faulty assumptions that they hold?
I think the faulty assumption that they hold is that it's all about work-life balance. It's all about being able to manage their family. I can tell you, here's an example. I worked with a woman who was a partner at a law firm who was on the hiring committee. And she said that when she was younger and had not been invited to be partner, along with her male cohorts, the ones who had joined the firm at the same time, she looked around for another job and she found another job. When she went to tell her practice head, he said, "What can we do to retain you? We need to keep you. What if we made you partner?" And she said, "Well, that's really what I was aiming at. That's why I'm looking for another job." And he said, "Well, we thought, we were concerned because of your age. We thought maybe you were wanting to have a family and it wouldn't work and there would be a balance issue." And she said, "Why didn't you ask me if it was something I could handle?" She said, "The incredible thing is now on the hiring committee, 15 years later, she hears the same thing. A woman's name will come up, there's going to be travel involved with that, or, that client is very demanding. She might get pregnant." Another thing that is problematic, I think, is that it's often hard for senior leaders to recognize which women really have leadership potential and where they don't. One of the reasons I got clued into this, again, this is another woman I've worked with. She held the highest position in one of the world's largest, most important pharmaceutical companies. And she rose very fast in the organization after a 20-year career as a physician. And I said to her, "What do you think is responsible for your fast rise? Because this is a company that has trouble keeping women and promoting women." She said, "I think it's that I speak very, very, very concisely." She said, "As a physician in private practice, I had to learn to convey very important, sometimes life or death information in the small window that insurance companies allow." She said, "And this made me very good at being concise." She said, "The culture here is a real get to the bottom line, don't fill me in on the background type of culture that values," she said, "what I think of as a male tone that's very, just address the issue at hand." She said, "So I'm very good at that." She said, "And I think that's what helped." And she said, "I see talented women who have so much potential, but they're viewed as, being all over the place or not communicating like a leader because they want to convey a lot of background." She said, "So I work with them and coach them." So I think there are a variety of factors, really different, but all of these play into it.
Now, would you agree, though, that there's been a lot of progress made in the last 30 years and in a lot of areas? I realize there's still a lot of areas to improve upon, but positive change is happening and we're moving in the right direction.
Oh, I agree with that so strongly, Charles. And sometimes I'm challenged on that. "Oh, we haven't made any progress in 15 years. I'm sorry, I was there. I have been there. I have been in this field now for 35 years, watching it up close. Tremendous progress, both in terms of women having confidence in what they have to contribute, being able to articulate that. Big, big shift. That's a big deal. The solidarity among women has increased off the charts, the recognition we need to do this together. And then the availability of men as allies and the recognition of how important they are. Those are three things that I've watched change dramatically. So that has really been a pretty big deal.
That's great to hear because it's always nice to know that we're moving in the right direction, especially in this day and age where there's so much uncertainty. But certain things, hopefully, we're getting right and we continue to see positive progress moving forward in these areas. So let's move to behavior change. And behavior change is tough for anyone. But you advocate with the Marshall's approach to this, where it makes it easier to see that happen. And you do that by adding or swapping a bad habit for a good habit. So if you could go into more details about your approach and what makes behavior change more likely to happen as a result of it.
Well, you're exactly right. And I think what is often missing is the real how of behavior change. You don't want to just identify, don't do this, don't do that. You need to provide people with alternatives. For example, what I was speaking about earlier with this reluctance to claim your achievements. There are a couple of very concrete things you can do. You can substitute the idea that I need to say, I met this goal, I achieved this benchmark, etc., with using the language of contribution. Our team was able to achieve some extraordinary things. This happened, that happened. Here was my contribution. This is what I was able to contribute. In terms of being concise, often what we were talking about in terms of the woman in the pharmaceutical firm, often women will start with, and they say, well, I don't know how to get to the point without giving the background. The background's important. Fine. Get to the point and say, there's some interesting background to this. And if you're interested, I'm glad to share it with you. That's so much more effective than starting with, let me tell you how I came up with this idea, which often with people with short attention spans, you can lose them. So it's a matter of having ideas about first having a very clear picture of what's getting in your way. And if there are a number of things, choose one. Don't feel discouraged. Don't, oh no, I've got 9 habits that are getting in my way. Just choose one. And then have some alternate ways to address it. Really, really helpful.
Thank you. Because to really get unstuck, to let go of that behavior that's not serving you, you first need to recognize one that it's a habit. And then most importantly, you need to bring conscious awareness to it so you can then try out new responses to hopefully get different results. Is there ways to gain more awareness around these habits, which is really that first step of changing them?
Certainly. And there are 2 things. First of all, it's important to recognize that whenever we do something differently, it feels awkward. So it doesn't mean it is awkward. It doesn't mean we're doing a bad job. That's important. The second thing is there's so much urging these days for people to be their authentic selves that it often holds us back from making changes that would serve us because we feel, well, that's not authentic because I haven't been doing that and it doesn't feel comfortable for me. So I think that thinking of, am I being professional can be more helpful than thinking, am I being authentic? There can be some issues with that. But the other thing is run it by somebody, ask somebody, practice, rehearse. Don't try to do it alone. Hey, I haven't been talking very much about what I contributed in terms of this. So I'm trying out some language so I can get more comfortable talking about it. How does this sound to you? Do you mind if I run it by you? I need to get comfortable with it. We get comfortable as we hear ourselves speaking, and it's very, very valuable to run it by other people.
Those are great tips to increase the awareness, but change is so hard. And you
Mhm.
identify and you kind of modify Marshall's 3 stages of change in your book to really make it more meaningful and impactful for women. So it'd be great for you to kind of just briefly go through those stages.
Sure, Charles. First of all, as I just said, you want to start with one thing. Start with one habit or one small part of a habit. I am going to start speaking up in that meeting, even though it feels intimidating to me. Secondly, what you want to do is enlist somebody to help you. You're going into a meeting, ask someone else to have you back. I'm going to speak in this meeting. I've been uncomfortable in it in the past. So if you could, if it's appropriate and you feel comfortable with it, if you could voice some support, that would be so, so helpful to me. We can't really do this alone. Very, very important. Third, we need to let go of feeling that we need to be perfect in the change, this recognition that we are a work in progress. Marshall said that in his 40 years of coaching, he has never worked with a woman, whether she was the president of a university, the CEO of a corporation, a general in the military. He has never worked with a woman where at some point he didn't have to say, please don't be too hard on yourself. And finally, we want to recognize that none of the habits that get in our way are bad habits. They are just habits and behaviors that may have served us early, but do not serve us as well as we move forward. And that's why we're trying to let go of them so that we can really achieve our full potential and develop careers that are satisfying, sustainable, and rewarding.
And that's so important to emphasize, right? That what got you here won't get you there, like Marshall says. It's these served you at some point, but they're hurting you now. And thank you for providing those insights into making change less daunting. Maybe we could unpack one or two of those common beliefs that women have that get in their way, in which cause these bad habits to form. And one of them, which I don't think is as common in men, is being a good person means not disappointing others.
Charles, you have nailed it. That is exactly right. Never disappointing anyone. One of the things I've realized, and this is not really in How Women Rise, but I've realized it doing so many programs since, is that women spend a lot of time trying to manage other people's perceptions. So we'll kind of be trying to meet everybody's expectations, manage their perceptions. That takes a lot of energy. And that's energy that we could be investing in being very clear, in being direct in a way that's not, brusque or offensive, and thinking through new solutions. So I really work with women to try to help them let go of trying to manage people's perceptions. The other thing is that people change their mind. If you practice a new behavior, they might at first think, oh boy, where did that come from? Oh, she's always been so nice. She's always been so agreeable. She's always said yes to things. She's not saying yes anymore. So that can, become an issue for other people.
Great. And then the other one, which I know is unique to women, and it's not fair to have this belief, but women should always be role models for other women. And you have a great example in your book with Marissa Mayer that maybe you could let our listeners know about.
Well, exactly. I mean, we know we have enough to do with managing our jobs and our families, but there is an expectation that women should also, especially women who are successful or achieve a visible or high position, should also always serve as role models for other women. So the behavior is scrutinized and judged. The example with Marissa Mayer was amazing. It was when she was CEO of Yahoo, and she had twins in that period. And she came back to work after, I believe, 3 weeks with twins. Obviously, she's Melissa Mayer. She has a lot of support at home. She came back to work and the media went wild. This is setting a terrible example for other women. Other women are going to have to, now feel that they have to go back after 3 weeks. No, it was her decision. She had the right to make a decision that she felt served what she was trying to do in the world and served her family as well. We all have enough work to find our way and again, create careers where we can reach our full potential and do what we are trying to do in the world, be who we're trying to be in the world. And that's a balancing act. And then adding on to it, this sort of role model hell idea that everything we do, we have to always make sure that this is something that other women can benefit and learn from is just a bridge too far.
I couldn't agree with you more. This expectation, these beliefs start early. I mean, girls are rewarded for being thoughtful and obedient, while boys are given more latitude. What are some effective ways, or what do you think needs to be done to stop this from happening so it's not so ingrained even before they get into the workplace?
It is ingrained before we get into the workplace often. We did research in How Women Rise that organizations tend to promote and reward women based upon the perception that they are precise and correct in what they do, that the quality of their work is reliably precise and correct. Organizations tend to promote men based upon their visibility, their connections, and the perception that they are big picture thinkers. These are very, very different criteria. So organizations also reinforce, often without meaning to or wanting to, that message that being precise and correct is what is most valuable in women. So we internalize that and feel that everything has to be done perfectly, and we have to become experts in everything from the day that we start a job, and we can't apply for a job that might have a few things that we're not capable of doing the day that we start the job. So on one hand, there are a number of things women specifically can do to help let go of that. We can discuss that. But on the other, it's really important for organizations, for teams, for units, for divisions to ask themselves, what are we doing to promote a culture of perfection and pleasing in women? Because there are things organizations can do, and there are things we can do. And by the way, we can be part of the problem. We can be that boss who, when a woman says, gives us a piece of work, says, oh, this is perfect. This is just perfect. This is what I expect of you. That's reinforcing the message that for women, precise and correct is the way to go. Perfection, every detail right.
A lot of great insights there. And I think our listeners are really going to benefit from those. Let's get into the habits. And you take the habits from Marshall's, where he examines 20 habits or behaviors that he routinely sees in getting in the way of successful people. Now, some are predominantly done by men, not saying that females can do those as well. So you separate out those. You also give 4 gender neutral habits that both men and women are equally likely to have that get in their way. And then you focus on 12 habits that really are what women struggle with, perhaps more than men. And the key insight here, which I love, is that behavior changes often are about not acting rather than acting. And like Peter Drucker said, like you quote in your book, we spend a whole lot of time teaching leaders what to do, not near enough times teaching them what not to do or to stop. And I love how you say, okay, here are the list of behaviors to not do. Why do you think this is a more effective approach? Which I agree with you, but I love for you to explain that to our listeners so they can see the benefit of this approach.
Well, first of all, it's easier to not do something than to do something. We're busy, we're overwhelmed. I find that adding things to people's to-do list is very challenging. I don't know about you, but my to-do list grows all day long. But I think having a to-don't list is really extremely effective. Looking at everything, is this a great use of my time? Who else might I be able to bring in to do this? Am I doing this to satisfy a perfectionistic boss? If that is true, how can I have a conversation about being able to use my time and my energy more effectively so I can do the important things and we can focus on that? So I think that in terms of what not to do, it's not even what not to do, although Drucker phrased it that way, but what to let go of. What isn't serving me? How am I using my time and my energy in a way that may just be spinning my wheels? We all know that liberating feeling when we take something out. You know what? I'm going to cancel that appointment. It's just too much. That's the kind of feeling we can get when we look at, what am I doing that doesn't serve me?
That paradigm shift is so important and essential. And I love your programs because you focus on helping participants be more effective and thoughtful rather than just busier. So you list 12 behaviors that you find most often you observe that are keeping women stuck. Maybe we could just identify the top 3 that you think are really relevant and prevalent throughout the economy today with various senior level women, and just kind of unpack those, give some insights, maybe a story, and then some helpful tips.
Okay, well, the first is we've already discussed, which is expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions. You're uncomfortable talking about what you've done, so you default to a passive strategy. And you need to find a way you're comfortable with speaking about what you're contributing. And I find the language of contribution to be very useful. And I also find phrasing what you do as information that can be useful to other people to be very good. Here's some information that might help you with this client. What I learned when I was doing X was this. I had this response from the client, and I wanted to share that with you. It was a very good response because I know that you're going to be working with a similar client or that client or whatever. And I thought that this information could be helpful to you. So for women, the advantage is in framing what they might be thinking of as boasting as information. And for other people, it's, oh, yeah, that could be useful to me. Thank you for that. It's sharing your insights in a way that can be helpful. And then it gets you into this sort of frame of mind of how can I interpret what I'm doing as helpful to other people.
Now, is that something that initially people would feel a little bit awkward with, that it's kind of self-promoting or boastful, and they feel that it's almost maybe an imposter syndrome they have, that they're saying, okay, well, I'm continually promoting myself. What's that right balance?
Well, I think the imposter syndrome happens because we're not accustomed to doing these things. So the imposter syndrome begins to dissipate as we get more comfortable doing something that may feel inauthentic or not like us because we haven't done it in the past. After you've done it for a bit, you don't feel like an imposter doing it.
Thank you for providing that. So that's one of them, expecting others to spontaneously notice and reward your contributions. What's another habit that gets in the way that you've seen recently?
Well, a big one is putting your job before your career. And that basically is pouring all your energy and all your effort into doing the best possible job with the job you have without thinking strategically about where does this job fit in my career? Where do I intend it to fit in my career? Where do I want it to lead me? What skills do I need to develop on this job that may serve me better? What connections do I need to develop on this job that may serve me in the future? And this is often done based on the presumption that if I do a great job, then I will be promoted. I will be promoted because the person who gets promoted is the one who does the best job in the job they have. This is not necessarily true. If we're the one who does the best job, we can make ourselves indispensable so that our boss or our team really doesn't necessarily want us to move on. The other thing about that is it tends to align with another habit in the book, which is failing to enlist allies from day one, where we think, well, okay, my job now is to just really master this job. And I'm going to keep my head down for 6 months. And then I'm going to look up and start building connections instead of asking who's going to be important for me to make this job a success. So it's a lack of intentionality. It's a sort of not thinking strategically about the job you have.
So it's taking time to reflect, even though these days it seems like everyone's overwhelmed. You're mired in the weeds of the logistics, the operations of your job. It's really spending that time to think strategically and reflect so that your ladder is not against the wrong building, right? Or you're not making yourself so indispensable in your current role that they don't want you to move up within the organization because of what you've been currently doing in your current job.
And also that you don't get overly identified as, well, she's just so terrific in that job, that we are capable of developing other skills. So that's an important point. We don't want to just identify ourselves as the perfect person for the job we
Love that. How about one more that you are finding pretty common these days with women leaders?
have. Well, I have to go with the perfection trap. And that is not just these days, but that has been throughout my career. And this is basically feeling you're perfect or else you failed. And as we've talked about, organizations often encourage this in women without even intending to. The issue with the perfection trap is this: it is probably for women the classic what got you here won't get you there behavior, and that it really serves you well early in your career. But as you move higher, it becomes highly problematic. It's very tough to delegate when you're a perfectionist because you want everything to be done perfectly. You have a tendency to micromanage, and this can get in the way of other people developing their skills because you're not actually even allowing them to develop their skills. You're also sending the message to them. You have to be perfect too. But I think the biggest problem is that as you move higher, the stress you create through perfectionism, both for yourself and for the people around you, becomes unsustainable over time. If you are a perfectionist, if you identify with this and you're early in your career, you want to do what you can to begin to address it. Also, when you're a perfectionist, you become highly risk averse because how can you take a risk if everything has to turn out perfectly? So it's definitely something that anybody who identifies with needs to work on.
And you mentioned a great phrase in the book too, that perfect is the enemy of good. In other words, don't agonize, don't imagine you need to start in the perfect place and get every step right. Just get going.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd like to end just with some positive because we're talking about all the habits to stop. But in the research, and I think you indicate this in your book too, Marshall says that women in organizations are perceived as being more effective leaders than men.
Well, that's certainly true. And that is how women are assessed by their direct reports, by their colleagues, and often, though less often, by senior leaders who may not be as aware of what they're contributing. So generally in the consensus, if you look at leader measures of effective leadership, women tend to rank higher than men. And I think that that speaks to something very strongly. Women can become overly earnest in their efforts to, it goes back to perfection and putting your job before your career, in their efforts to do everything right and to be an effective leader. And that's a very strong commitment and it's a good commitment, but it's also important to sort of make peace with that, not feel like we have to prove it at every moment.
Thank you for providing that. And as we near the end, I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning, just to give an action plan to those leaders on the call that want to make these behavior changes, that making sustainable, lasting change requires focus. But I think a lot of people try to tackle too much too soon and get discouraged. Have you found that to be the case?
Oh, absolutely. I see that. I mean, women come up to me in airports and hotel lobbies and say, "Oh, I have 9 habits in that book. I don't know where to start." It almost doesn't matter. I say start with whatever seems easiest. Start with whatever is most simple, but just start. And then the second thing that I said earlier about enlisting people, informally enlisting people. Hey, I'm really trying to get better at being concise when I make presentations. Would you watch me in this meeting? Give me some feedback. Or I'm trying to get more concise in my presentations and meetings. I notice you are really good at it. Do you have any tips for me? Is there anything you do in preparation? When you practice in that way, when you get other people involved, when you ask for their support and their help, you are to some degree leveraging your relationships in the service of your own development, a fantastic thing. You are advertising the fact that you are changing, so people are more likely to notice, wow, she used to be kind of all over the map. I've noticed how crisp and focused she seems in her presentation. Why did they notice? Because we've been talking about it. Also, Marshall has fantastic research that shows the people who are most likely to make long-term positive behavioral change do not do it alone. They have a coach, they have a peer coach, or they practice some version of what he calls stakeholder coaching, what I call informal enlistment of other people to help you.
Thank you. As we reach the end of the episode, I always like to do a call to action. If it's possible, can you give leaders that are listening right now one piece of advice, especially those that are the female senior leaders, that they could do right away that would make an impact?
Yeah, I would say the one thing you can do right away that would make an impact if you're in a leadership position is start demonstrating what I just talked about on informal enlistment. Show that degree of openness and vulnerability to the process of change. We can all benefit by making positive changes. So say in a meeting, here's something I'm trying to work on. If anybody has any thoughts, if anybody notices something else, please feel free to let me know because I'm determined to get better at this. That sets the tone for the whole meeting, for an organization, for a big division in a company. you set that tone of openness and recognition that we're all just humans struggling to do a good job. We need help, and most of us can benefit by changing certain things that may get in our way.
Great piece of advice to leave our listeners with. Thank you so much, Sally, for being on the program today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
People can get in contact with me very easily. Go to my website, sally@sallyhelgesen.com. There's a contact button. It comes directly through to me. I answer all day people who've gotten in touch that way. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not always great about my LinkedIn messages because I get a lot of them, but I have been hugely enjoying quite recently being on Twitter. So those are great things. And both LinkedIn and Twitter are just Sally Helgesen.
Thank you again, Sally. Great program. A lot of insights and actionable strategies that I know our listeners are going to benefit from.
Thank you, Charles. Always such a pleasure to talk with you.
This concludes this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com if you'd like to subscribe. This podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify. It can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. Until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.